We think this has the makings of a debate, so let's have it. Yes or no to this statement: the more we evolve, the less we need God.
This is a review of one of the debates on Intelligence Squared. Their YouTube channel name is Open to Debate. I'm not going to share the entire debate, but rather I'm just going to focus in on one of the debaters' opening arguments and provide some commentary on that. Fair use, baby!
I'm John Donvan. I am on stage with 4 superbly qualified debaters who will argue for and against that resolution. We are at the K Playhouse at Hunter College in New York, where our live audience will choose the winner. As always, our debate goes in 3 rounds, and if all goes well, and I'm sure it will, civil discourse will win as well. I want to remind people who have not yet voted, this is another chance you have for the next few minutes to cast your pre-debate vote. Go on a web browser on your phone to iq2us.org/vote. You will be presented with prompts that give you 3 options: to vote for the motion, to vote against the motion, or to tell us that you are undecided, which is a perfectly reasonable starting position. And again, I'll remind you, it's the difference between the first and the second votes, the pre-debate and the post-debate votes, that determines our winner.
These are professional debates, and I have to say I really like their judging system. The objective here is to change people's minds, and so the winner of the debate is the team that effectively changes the most minds. You can't just do that by preaching to the choir. You actually have to recruit people from the pool of undecided and the opposing team. So that's where things get interesting. This is a true debate. Please enjoy.
Speaking first for the motion: the more we evolve, the less we need God. Here is cognitive neuroscientist Heather Berlin.
Okay, so I'm going to argue in support of the motion from several different angles. But first I'm going to put my cards on the table and say I am not an atheist. I was raised Jewish, culturally more than religiously, but I still remain open to the possibility that there's some higher creative power in the universe, some benevolence that I can't quite comprehend that might deserve the name God.
The first thing that she chose to say here is, "Here, let me show you my cards. I'm not going to hide from you. I'm one of you because I was culturally raised amongst you." This is a huge attempt to speak to the opposing side and build a relationship of trust.
But remember, we're not here to debate whether God exists. We're here to debate whether God is becoming less needed as humanity evolves. And however we measure that need, whether it's a need for explanations, a need for comfort, or a feeling of belonging, or just to give us a higher sense of meaning or purpose, the answer is clear. The more we evolve, the less we need God. Now, I'm going to go through these various forms of need one by one, but first we should be clear what we mean by evolve. We're not talking about biological evolution or changes in gene frequency. We're talking about cultural evolution, or just the development of humanity. And scientific progress over the past several hundred years has completely transformed our knowledge of how the world works. And each major scientific breakthrough has had to overturn some religious dogma, right? So we've gone from believing in special creation to an understanding of how all living things descend from a single common ancestor by blind trial and error process, natural selection. We've gone from believing that God placed the earth in the center of creation to an understanding that we inhabit a tiny blue dot in a vast cosmos with 100 billion galaxies.
It sounds like she's preaching to the choir here. She's not doing anything to substantiate any of her claims. She's just stating everything as a matter of fact. She's definitely not talking to me over here on the far end of the opposing side. She's just reaching for the pool of undecided right now, the low-hanging fruit, the people who are already mostly on her side that just need that extra little shove to join her.
We've gone from believing that diseases were curses caused by evil spirits and bad karma to an understanding of the deep mechanisms of disease at the cellular and molecular level. But we still live in a world where people reject life-saving medicine on religious grounds. Just the other day, there was a news story about a 2-year-old boy who died because his parents chose prayer over medical treatment.
That is a jab at the opposing side, and is going to sacrifice any potential teammates who actually believe in faith healing. Also take notice of how vague and unsubstantiated her claim was. She didn't say who the boy was, no name, we don't even know what religion he was from, or anything like that. So let's just ignore every example of successful faith healing out there and just focus in on that one unspecified little boy who apparently died. I've got to say though, faith healing works, and there are a lot of very specific testimonies out there of this, such as this one with Maggie E. Parsons, that should not be ignored. And I can add my own personal testimony to this, because this is something I have personally witnessed many times throughout my life.
So the more our understanding evolves, the less we need God.
To say that we as a society understand more than we used to is a huge assumption right there. I just look at the way we're taught in school about the way stars are formed. As we know it, gas disperses in a vacuum. But in school we're taught that stars are formed by gases clumping together in the vacuum of space and then exploding? That doesn't work. To say that, it's like de-evolution, not evolution. And don't even get me started on the basic survival skills. If you suddenly had to go out and plant a garden and live off of that for an entire year, how much of society do you think would die, like, overnight?
Now, using God to explain natural phenomena is an argument known as God of the gaps. Throughout history, if there was a gap in our understanding, it was by default to say God must explain it. But the more science illuminates our world and gives us a real understanding, the fewer gaps are left for God to inhabit.
We hear the God of the gaps argument a lot, but there's a major flaw in it. Just because society makes a certain explanation for something, that doesn't automatically mean that they are right. Also, there's a very slippery slope involved in there. Just because many lightning bolts aren't directly thrown by God, that doesn't mean none are.
So when you hear from our opponents, be vigilant. They might tell you that the materialistic science can only explain so much, but we still need God beyond the limits of our understanding. That's a God of the gaps argument.
No, it isn't. The God of the gaps argument is to say that if we don't understand something, that automatically means God did it. So if you don't understand how your cell phone works, then that automatically means God just makes it work. But she said that we need God to go beyond the limits of our understanding. That much is true. We need God because the glory of God is intelligence, and we need Him to help lift the veil from off of our faces and help see things that are beyond the limits of our understanding. Without Him, we are lost.
Just because science can't explain something yet, it doesn't logically follow that God wins by default.
That is a straw man? No one claimed that.
And if God is just another name for scientific ignorance, that's hardly a God worth celebrating.
And that is another jab. She set up her straw man, and now she's preaching to the choir, those who already agree with her.
Now, in my own field, neuroscience, 350 years ago, René Descartes had argued that our perceptions had to be accurate because God would never deceive us. And our brains were made of physical mechanisms, but our conscious minds are an immaterial essence, a spirit, that interacts with the physical brain through the pineal gland. But today, neuroscience is revealing that Descartes was wrong. Our perceptions are biased and inaccurate, which may explain the persistence of supernatural beliefs.
Who made René Descartes any kind of religious authority? Our perceptions can never be deceived? What kind of religious authority out there teaches there is no such thing as temptation?
And consciousness doesn't interact with the brain. Consciousness is what the brain does. And there's no reason to believe that consciousness existed before brains existed.
Just because you're not aware of any reasons, that doesn't mean there are none. Here's a pretty interesting mouse study on that. Here's an article published by Nature, where some scientists took some male mice and exposed them to the smell of oranges, cherries, and almonds, which typically isn't very scary to them. But every time they exposed them to this smell, they would give them an electric shock, which taught them to fear the smell. And after doing this, they allowed them to breed with the females. The females never received the treatment. And even without any exposure to the males, the babies were born with this fear of those particular smells, even though there was no change in their DNA to cause this fear. Now, some people say that it wasn't a change in the DNA that caused this, but rather the way the DNA was interpreted. But that is entirely speculative, and I am just as justified in saying that this is evidence of preborn consciousness or awareness as they are.
Now, some people think they've experienced God directly, with or without drugs, but neuroscientists can now induce religious or transcendental experiences by stimulating specific brain areas with powerful magnets, giving people out-of-body experiences and sensation with oneness with the universe, not to mention hallucinations that would rival the Book of Revelations.
What was that she said about Descartes before? She said Descartes described the brain as a kind of spiritual transceiver. So if you start messing with the brain, you're going to start messing with the brain's reception and the kind of signals it's going to receive, right?
So the more our understanding of the brain evolves, the less we need God. And evolutionary and cognitive psychology are also helping to explain the origins of our need for God, for comfort, morality, sense of belonging, and why that need is diminishing. Religions traditionally provided a space for communal activities, a sense of trust among in-group members, and a disincentive to free riders. So belief in God has done a lot of good throughout history.
Finally, some common ground.
But our modern societies now provide laws and social safety nets to help us when we fall and to disincentivize bad behavior. And our social reputations are online now. I mean, when it comes to people like Harvey Weinstein, I'd say that public shaming, social rejection, and criminal charges carry a lot more weight than the fear of hell.
I don't know who Harvey Weinstein is, so her reference is lost on me.
I mean, after all, he didn't hire priests for redemption. He hired lawyers and publicists.
Again, I don't know the reference, but that sounds like a jab to me.
And the very existence of countries like Denmark and Sweden, majority atheist countries that are high functioning and relatively free from suffering.
What makes you think they are free from suffering? As the Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl once said, "To live is to suffer, but to survive is to find meaning in the suffering."
Tells us that living without God is fully compatible with human psychology, as long as the need to make sense of the world is satisfied by science and our need to belong is satisfied by our social networks and communities. So the more our societies evolve, the less we need God.
I keep hearing this presupposed claim that society is evolving. Forgive me, but culturally speaking, I'm not convinced. Perhaps that's a jab on my part at the far end of my opposing viewpoint. But if society was evolving, I would expect society to become more prolific and see a rise in population growth, not a decrease in population growth. That is how the success of a species is determined.
Of course, for many people, life is not as comfortable as it is for those Scandinavians, and God is a source of comfort for those who are suffering or who have lost loved ones or who are stricken by poverty or disease, and I get that. But if we're determined to work together to alleviate poverty, disease, and suffering, and make people happier in this world, and if we're aware of the fact that people tend, on average, to turn to God less often when they feel safer, happier, healthier, and more stable, then we have to admit that the motion is correct. The more we evolve, the less we need God. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather Berlin. And that is the resolution. The more we evolve, the less we need God.
Wow, did you see her provide any substantiation for any of her claims there? Yet when we look at the debate results, her team still won. Not because of truth or accuracy, but because her team changed the most minds, which was the objective of the debate. And some of that may have had to do with the opposing team's argument, where they claimed that God is consciousness itself, which I don't think many of the undecided, or even their own side, related to very well. If God is human consciousness itself, it presents God as a very fractured individual with a massive personality disorder. Nonetheless, I think this random lady in the audience did a better job of making their case than they did with this one question.
You can tell us your name, please.
Bonnie John from New York. To my ear, this side, who is against, has reframed the question. So I ask the people for the motion, if it were the more we evolve, the less we need consciousness, would you get up and go over there?
That's a pretty clever question. I like that.
That is a good question.
Now watch him spin around and talk about a bunch of random stuff in response to that question.
No. I think the problem is the
We
word
are
is,
conscious.
The word is too broad. I mean, as Wittgenstein pointed out, we only have language to express our words, our thoughts between each other. So we look for synonyms. Consciousness is experience. It's the immeasurable potential. It's invisible. It's all modes of knowing. These are just different ways of saying the same thing. So it doesn't really get us anywhere. There's no specific actionable points. Like, what do I do? So the motion on the table is, what difference does it make? What does it matter? And so we have to have some definition of that, which is why I started off with the survival and flourishing of sentient beings. So what does it take to do that? And now we have some idea about that. Now I should say, just parenthetically, that I kind of went hard on religion. I know that the Quakers and Wilberforce advocated for the abolition of slavery and so on. There are, certain individuals that helped the process along, but their biggest opponents were their fellow religious people, their fellow God believers. So it's not God itself that's going to get us there. It's some rational argument, some secular, reasonable argument. So the fact that Christians sometimes say, well, I've reinterpreted Mark 3:9 and Jesus really meant women should vote. Okay, fine. But you're getting there after the movement has already made its progress due to secular, rational arguments.
And I think your partner wants to join that.
Yeah, and I would say, if you want to redefine consciousness as saying all of these things, compassion and being kind to others and doing things that are actually real in this world to help people. Again, you don't need the concept of God or higher spirit or something that happened before the Big Bang in order to do those things, in order to live helpful, kind lives, to make everybody's lives better. So in a sense, I don't think that the more we evolve, the more we need God in this definition as well, because we can find it in other ways. We can get better and improve humanity in other ways without having some either real or false belief system. Either way, we can be compassionate, we can have a deep understanding, we can think about the infinite, we could do the right thing, and we don't need God.
We do need God. Saying we don't is like a broken watch telling the watchmaker, I don't need you. And so long as there's more information out there for him to teach us, we will always need God. Thank you all for watching.